So let's review some of these parables. You got the persistent widow. The persistent widow versus the corrupt judge. That's Luke 18:1 through 8. Should we just go ahead and read these straight? The dishonest manager. Luke 16:1 through 13. So these are kind of scandalous stories, and then we'll see the position that Jesus takes. So Luke 16:1 to 13. Let's see here. Luke 16:1 to 13. The parable of the dishonest steward. Then he also said to his disciples, a rich man had a steward who was reported to him for squandering his property. He summoned him and said, what is this I hear about you? Prepare a full account of your stewardship, because you can no longer be my steward. The steward said to himself, what shall I do? Now that my master has taken the position of steward away from me, I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I know what I shall do. When I am removed from the stewardship, they may welcome me into their homes. So he called his master's debtors one by one. To the first he said, how much do you owe my master? He replied, 100 measures of olive oil. He said to them, here is your promissory note. Sit down and quickly write one for 50. Then to another, and he says, how much do you owe? He said, 100 cores of wheat. He said to him, here is your promissory note. Write one for 80. And the master commended that dishonest steward for acting prudently. For the children of this world are more prudent in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. I tell you, make friends for yourselves with dishonest wealth, so that when it fails, you will be welcome into eternal dwellings. The person who is trustworthy in very small matters is also trustworthy in great ones. And the person who is dishonest in very small matters is also dishonest in great ones. If therefore you are not trustworthy with dishonest wealth, who will trust you with true wealth? If you are not trustworthy with what belongs to another, who can give you what is yours? No servant can serve two masters. He will either hate one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. You cannot serve both God and mammon. Okay? A saying against the Pharisees. Let's see here. Can we edit this? I had done the thing and then it came back like, private, and I wanted it public, but I don't know how to make it public once I had clicked the thing. I don't want to go back. I already typed in the damn title, So it's like, what am I supposed to do? Here it is, visibility, private. So we're going public. Are you ready? We're going public. Hell yeah. So let's carry on. So what else do we have here? Well, we have the wicked tenants. Do you want to hear about the persistent widow first or the wicked tenants? Let's go with the persistent widow. Luke 18:1 through 8. The parable of the persistent widow. Then he told them a parable about the necessity for them to pray always without becoming weary. He said, there was a judge in a certain town who neither feared God nor respected any human being. And a widow in that town used to come to him and say, render a just decision for me against my adversary. For a long time the judge was unwilling, but eventually he thought, well, it is true that I neither fear God nor respect any human being. Because this widow keeps bothering me, I shall deliver a just decision for her, lest she finally come and strike me. The Lord said, pay attention to what the dishonest judge says. Will not God then secure the rights of his chosen ones, who call out to him day and night? Will he be slow to answer them? I tell you, he will see to it that justice is done for them speedily. But when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? The parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. You want to hear this one? He then addressed this parable to those who were convinced of their own righteousness and despised everyone else. Two people went up to the temple area to pray. One was a Pharisee and the other was a tax collector. The Pharisee took up his position and spoke this prayer to himself. O God, I thank you that I am not like the rest of humanity, the greedy, dishonest, and adulterous, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and I pay tithes on my whole income. But the tax collector stood off at a distance and would not even raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast. And he paid, O God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, the latter went home justified, not the former. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted. The wicked tenants. This is Luke 20. You want to hear about the wicked tenants, or do you want to hear about Zacchaeus? Zacchaeus, the tax collector. Let's go with Zacchaeus, the tax collector, and then we're going to go with the wicked tenants. He came to Jericho and intended to pass through the town. Now a man there named Zacchaeus, let's just say Zach, who was a chief tax collector and a wealthy man, was seeking to see who Jesus was, but he could not see him because of the crowd, for he was short in stature. So he ran ahead, climbed a sycamore tree in order to see Jesus, who was about to pass that way. When he reached the place, Jesus looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down quickly. Zachariah, Zach. For today I must stay at your house. And he came down quickly and received him with joy. When they all saw this, they began to grumble, saying, Jesus has gone to stay at the house of a sinner. But Zach stood there and said to the Lord, Behold, half of my possessions, Lord, I shall give it to the poor. And if I have extorted anything from anyone, I shall repay it 4 times over. And Jesus said to him, Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a descendant of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save what was lost. So Jesus is going to hang out with a tax collector who is a wealthy man, but he's going to make Zach sell half of his possessions. And if he extorted anybody, for them to pay 4 times the amount. So yeah, Jesus welcomed the rich person, but he made the rich person sell half of his stuff. Pay back anybody he fucked over. Let's go with the wicked tenants. This is Luke 20. So this is past the parable of the gold coins. The authority of Jesus is questioned. You dare question the authority of the Christ? This has to do with the landowner planting a vineyard, leasing it to tenants. Here we go. One day, as he was teaching the people in the temple area and proclaiming the good news, the chief priests and scribes, together with the elders, approached him and said to him, Tell us, by what authority are you doing these things? Or who is the one who gave you this authority? He said to them in reply, I shall ask you a question. Tell me, was John's baptism of heavenly or of human origin? Let's answer that question. Was John the Baptist, when he baptized the people in the Jordan River, did that come from man or did that come from heaven? Who gave the authority for John the Baptist to baptize the people in the Jordan River? They discussed this among themselves, and they said, if we say of heavenly origin, he will say, why did you not believe him? But if we say of human origin, then all the people will stone us, for they are convinced that John was a prophet. So they answered that they did not know where it came from. And then Jesus says, then neither shall I tell you by what authority I do these things. Oh, you don't know? You don't know where the authority of John the Baptist came from? Was it man or God? Well, then I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you where I get my authority from. The parable of the tenant farmers. Then Jesus proceeded to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard. A man planted a vineyard, leased it to tenant farmers, and then went on a journey for a long time. At harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenant farmers to receive some of the produce of the vineyard. But they beat the servant, and they sent him away empty-handed. So he proceeded to send another servant. But him also they beat and insulted and sent away empty-handed. Then he proceeded to send a third. This one too they wounded and threw out. The owner of the vineyard said, what shall I do? Well, then I shall send my beloved son. Maybe they will respect him. But when the tenant farmers saw him, they said to one another, this is the heir. Let us kill him, so that the inheritance may become ours. So they threw the son out of the vineyard, and they killed him. What will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and put those tenant farmers to death, and turn over the vineyard to others. When the people heard this, they exclaimed, let it not be so. But he looked at them and asked, what then does this scripture passage mean? The stone which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Everyone who falls on that stone will be dashed to pieces, and it will crush anyone on whom it falls. The scribes and chief priests sought to lay their hands on him at that very hour, but they feared the people, for they knew that he had addressed this parable to them. Woe to ye Pharisees, you hypocrites! Woe to ye Pharisees! The stone which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. And everyone who falls on that stone will be dashed to pieces, and it will crush on anyone on whom it falls. So he's saying he's the rock, Jesus is the rock, and you could use the rock to bash the head in of a Pharisee. The parable of the tenant farmers is very smart, because the religious authorities are the tenants. You have a landowner, he established a vineyard, and the tenants were the religious authorities, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the chief priests, and the elders. So that's God, right? God gave you the temple, and you are now a tenant of the temple. And then God sends the servants, the prophets, to collect the grapes from the vineyard to the temple. But the tenants, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the chief priests, and the elders, they're just going to beat and shame, and they're going to kill the prophets who come to the temple to collect the grapes. Not the grapes of wrath, but the grapes of God, the spiritual grapes. And then finally, the tenants, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the chief priests, and the elders, they're going to murder the landowner's son and try to seize the inheritance. So the owner destroys the tenants and gives the vineyard to others. So this parable is crystal clear to me. Jesus is the son. God is the landowner. All this land belongs to God. And so you had the Pharisees who were the tenants, and when the prophets came to the temple to collect the spiritual grapes, the Pharisees and the Sadducees beat them and shamed them and killed them. And then ultimately God is going to send his only son in order to collect the spiritual grapes, and they're going to murder his son as well. And that's why the scribes and the chief priests want to lay hands on Jesus Christ at that very hour, but they're afraid of the people, for they knew that Jesus had addressed that parable to them. The good thing about parables is that anybody can interpret a parable however they want to. It's not crystal clear, it's not crystal clear. If somebody says, hey, what's the prices of eggs in Belgium? And I'm like, okay. So you had this prince and this king, and they planted a vineyard, and they gave these 10 coins out, and then the coins was multiplied. And then each who has a lot, and those who have none. Thus be it the word of the Lord. So $5? How much is the eggs in Belgium, asshole? That's what I asked you. Why did you just tell me a big long parable? Are you trying to confuse me? So it's kind of the genius of a parable. When it comes to reading, not only, people could debate like literal words, like what does the right to free speech mean, right? We don't even have that really hammered down in our society. What does the right to free speech mean? So we can know the literal words, and we have different definitions for the literal words. But a parable is by its nature designed to be interpreted by us. So it's not crystal clear. So it's kind of genius for people to answer really all the questions as a parable. So you want me to talk to you about the unforgiving servant? There is this king, he forgave an enormous debt to one of his servants. But then one of his servants turned around and he would not forgive a fellow servant a tiny debt. And he's like, I showed you mercy for this large debt. You owed me $1 million. I said, you are pardoned. And then you went around and you told this guy that owed you $5 that he better pay up, and you started hounding him. Since you wouldn't be merciful with the $5, I'm going to go ahead and put the $1 million debt back on top of you. So the king was merciful at first, but then not later when he saw that the hypocrite wasn't being merciful for his fellow neighbors. If you forgive, you will be forgiven. Those who show mercy will be given mercy. The rich fool. Luke 12. What does Luke 12 have to say? Luke 12 says this, 16 to 21. The parable of the rich fool. So pay attention, you rich fools. Then Jesus told them this parable. Jesus spoke thusly. There was a rich man whose land produced a bountiful harvest. He asked himself, what shall I do? For I do not have space to store my harvest. And he said, this is what I shall do. I shall tear down my barns and build larger ones. There I shall store all my grain and other goods. So the rich fool, that sounds smart, right? You're producing all this grain. You want to store it in some barns. You go ahead and build a bunch of barns so you can store more grain, right? And then if you store enough grain, well, you'll have grain to be able to live on forever and ever and ever. Feed yourself, feed your family, feed your animals. There I shall store all my grain and other goods, and I shall say to myself, now as for you, you have so many good things stored up for many years. Rest, eat, drink, and be merry. Now you can just party. Now you can just party. You have all these barns. They're filled up with grain. But God said to him, you fool, this night your life will be demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, to whom will they belong? Thus will it be for the one who stores up treasure for himself, but is not rich in what matters to God. Dependence on God. He said to his disciples, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life and what you will eat, or about your body and what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing. Notice the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, yet God feeds them. How much more important are you than birds? Can any of you, by worrying, add a single moment to your lifespan? Even the smallest things are beyond your control. Why are you anxious about the rest? Notice how the flowers grow. They do not toil or spin, but I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of them. If God so clothes the grass in the field that grows today and is thrown into the oven tomorrow, will he not much more provide for you, O ye of little faith? As for you, do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, and do not worry anymore. All the nations of the world seek for these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these other things will be given you besides. Do not be afraid any longer, little flock, for your Father is pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your belongings and give alms. Provide money bags for yourselves, and do not wear out an inexhaustible treasure in heaven that no thief can reach nor moth destroy. For where your treasure is, there also will your heart be. So there you go. Does that not tell you everything you need? If God takes care of the birds, God takes care of the flowers, how much more important are you? Why do you have any anxiety? Why do you have any anxiety at all? Because you're stupid? Is that why you have anxiety? God takes care of the flowers and the trees and the birds and the animals, but he's not going to take care of you? So Jesus never aligned himself with any of the flawed characters in any of his parables. He's got all these scandalous stories, but Jesus never aligns himself with any of the flawed characters. Jesus did not plan on waging a violent revolution. How could Jesus plan a violent revolution with 12 people without any weapons? How could Jesus, coming from Jericho with a dozen followers, no weapon, start a war with the Roman Herodians. Jesus was a pacifist. Jesus said, love your enemies, turn the other cheek. Those who fight by the sword will die by the sword. At Gethsemane, the garden, the agony of the garden when he's going to get arrested, he was in the second floor of the house, so it's like he knew somebody rich, right? Jesus gets arrested. Remember when Judas had betrayed Jesus with a kiss? When Jesus gets arrested, he just goes away meekly. Peter cuts off the ear of one of the Roman soldiers. But apparently, even Jesus don't even believe in self-defense for self-preservation. He's getting arrested, and he does so meekly. And then when he's before Pilate, he's silent. And then they crucify him. He doesn't even utter a word of, okay, how about no? Hey, how about don't do this? You ever thought about not doing this? Jesus was a pacifist. Jesus believed that you should love your enemies. Why? Because the sun sets on the good and the evil alike. And since the sun sets on everybody and rains on everybody equally, the good and the evil, God is the God of the living. You got to love your neighbors, love God, but you also got to love your enemies. And you got to turn the other cheek. If the Romans want to make you walk a mile, you walk two. If the Romans want to steal your shirt, you give them your coat too. And if the Romans want to beat the holy hell out of you, then you let them. And you don't fight back. Like Martin Luther King Jr., you turn the other cheek. Just like Henry David Thoreau. You could be disobedient, but be civil about it. And if you're going to disobey, if you're going to resist, do so creatively. Don't fight by the sword or you'll die by the sword. So over and over again, Jesus is pacifist. Jesus is for nonviolence. And you're going to try to tell me that the parable of the 10 gold coins? The parable of the 10 gold coins is about Jesus saying, line up all my enemies and now execute them. Earthly kings steal. Earthly kings exploit. Earthly kings extort. They punish the prudent. They murder by the bushel. They love bloodshed and bloodbaths. Jesus didn't love the massacre of the innocents. The third servant in the parable of the 10 gold coins, he used a passive resistance. Why should I fuel a tyrant's coffers through risky investments when the system is rigged for the rich to get richer? I'll just take my dollar, keep my dollar in my pocket, and when the rich says, hey, what did you do with that dollar? Here it is. I didn't steal it. I didn't lose it. Take it. I'm rendering to Caesar's what is his. Zechariah 9:9, the prophecy of Zechariah 9:9. Jesus rode into Jerusalem riding on a donkey. That's an Old Testament prophecy that was fulfilled. Jesus was a humble and peaceful king. He had that triumphant entry. It was deliberately nonviolent, surrounded by unarmed followers, chanting psalms of peace from Psalms 118. He wasn't yelling battle cries. He wasn't riding on a war horse. He gave no resistance for his arrest. He was completely silent in front of Pilate. He forgave everybody who killed him when he was on the cross. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. Jesus believed in a kingdom of suffering love, not military might, not military domination. Jesus believes in nonviolent resistance. Love your enemies and bless those who curse you. Pray for those who persecute you. Jesus empowered the marginalized to resist creatively, to maintain the moral high ground, to invite repentance. You bow to the king, but you make sure you fart. Sure, he cleansed the temple with a whip. That was an act of disobedience, civil disobedience. They executed him because they saw that his weak little resistance of turning the other cheek was a threat to the empire. When I hit you, you're supposed to be scared. You're supposed to fight back. When I hit you and you turn the other cheek, how is turning the other cheek a threat to the empire? How? How is turning the other cheek, loving thy neighbor as yourself, loving your enemies, and not fighting by the sword, how is nonviolent pacifism a threat to the empire? I beat him up and he just stood there. How dare him? Well, then crucify that son of a bitch. Jesus empowered the marginalized to resist creatively. He had that triumphal entry, that arrest at Gethsemane. And then he forgave everybody when he was hanging on the cross. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? My God. So Jesus wanted us to be assertive enough to challenge injustice, humble enough to love enemies. Jesus had modeled and taught a radical, proactive nonviolence. He didn't say line all the enemies up and then murder them all, have a bloodbath, do a massacre of the innocents. The parable of the 10 gold coins is not about Christ. It's about Archelaus, one of Herod's sons, who killed 3,000 Jews in Jerusalem during Passover. And then he hunted down that Jewish delegation. 50 Jews who were part of that delegation. 8,000 had signed the petition. And Archelaus is going to hunt each and every one of them down. Not just killing the 50 Jews that were part of the Jewish delegation, but murdering their entire families. And then was that 70 CE destruction of Jerusalem, was that not a genocide? How many people were killed in that? Let's go ahead and ask the internet. How many people were killed in Jerusalem in 70 AD? Had to be a bunch. 1.1 million. Over 1 million people were killed from violence, starvation, and disease. And then 97,000 taken captive. The second temple razed, the city itself destroyed. So you had over 1 million people in Jerusalem, and the Romans killed all 1 million people, and they only left 97,000 alive. Could you imagine that? Could you imagine the empire murdering 1 million people in Jerusalem and then just letting 97,000 live? Holy fuck, that's a genocide. The Romans are going to commit a genocide against the Jewish people in Jerusalem. Jesus prophesies this. Jesus says the temple is going to be destroyed and then that you should run to the mountains. When Archelaus killed 3,000 people, they ran to the mountains. The Jewish Christians, when Jerusalem was being razed, they ran to Pella. And because they ran to Pella, the legacy of Jesus got to live on. So we need to be assertive enough to challenge injustice, humble enough to love the enemies, creative enough to break the cycles of harm. Jesus invites his followers to imagine responses to evil that is reflective of God's kingdom. Because peace comes through transformed hearts, not conquered foes. Let's see here. Sermon on the Plain. Blessed are the poor. Woe to the rich. The rich young ruler. Sell all your possessions to the poor. Reward will be great. Can't get through. The rich can't get into heaven unless they can take a camel and shove it through the eye of a needle. Proclaim the good news to the poor, liberty to the captives, give sight to the blind, set liberty to those who are oppressed. See Luke 4, Luke 14, Luke 16. When you give a big old feast, a banquet, don't invite all the rich and powerful. Invite the poor and the crippled and the lame and the blind. And you'll be blessed because they cannot repay you. Luke 16, 19 to 31, the rich man and Lazarus. The rich man had sumptuous feast, cornucopia, but Lazarus was a beggar. But what happened at the end of that? The rich man is in hell begging for a drop of water. Isn't that what that is? 19, let's see, 16, 19 to 31. Rich man and Lazarus. Oh, this is a good one. So the rich are going to go to hell, and then they're going to beg for a drop of water. And then Lazarus is going to be like, oh, now you wanted some water, huh? When I needed water, you didn't give a damn. Oh, look, the last is first and the first is last. Look at this. Blessed are the poor and woe to the rich. So Luke 16, 19 to 31. There was a rich man who dressed in purple garments and fine linen and dined sumptuously each day. And lying at his door was a poor man named Lazarus, whose cover was sores, who would gladly have eaten his fill of the scraps that fell from the rich man's table. Dogs even used to come and lick his sores. When the poor man died, he was carried away by angels to the bosom of Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. And from the netherworld, where he was in torment, he raised his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side. And he cried out, Father Abraham, have pity on me. Send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am suffering torment in these flames. Abraham replied, my child, remember that you received what was good during your lifetime, while Lazarus likewise received what was bad. But now he is comforted here, whereas you are tormented. Moreover, between us and you a great chasm is established to prevent anyone from crossing who might wish to go from our side to yours or from your side to ours. He said, then I beg you, Father, send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, so that he may warn them, lest they too come to this place of torment. But Abraham replied, they have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them. He said, oh no, Father Abraham, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. Then Abraham said, if they will not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded if someone should rise from the dead. Please, just give me a drop of water. The rich man is burning in hell, and Lazarus is laughing up in heaven with Abraham. He's like, just dip your finger in and just give me a little drop of water from your finger. That's all I want. So Lazarus got the last laugh. He was poor and begging for the scraps and even his sores. Only the dogs were licking his sores. Luke 13:30 says that the last will be first and the first will be last. Luke 11:37-54 says, woe to you Pharisees, you hypocrites. You care about the tithing of mint, dill, and cumin, but you forget the weightier things, the more important things, like faith, mercy, and justice. You strain out a gnat, but you swallow a camel. So when it comes to percentages, I would say 80% of the Gospels are about blessed are the poor. 20% is about if you do have money, if you are rich, you should sell it to charity, sell it to the poor. But if you do have money, be smart with it and help people. Don't just hoard it all for yourself. You selfish sons of bitches. So yeah, the parable of the 10 gold coins, that is not Jesus. That is not Jesus, the Christ, our Lord and Savior. Amen.